people. You know what day it is. It's Sunday. This is Khalida. We about to do the PFT, but even though it's Sunday, I'm giving you a preview. Day 15, week 3. Let's do it. All right. You want me to just sit? Or?
Yes.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, it is day 15. Day 15. It is your pulmonary wellness quinceañera, and it is time for the question of the day. So the question of the day comes to us from Pat Johnson, and the question of the day is, I'm going to do this question in a different voice. The question of the day is there any connection, or can lung problems be exacerbated by stomach or bowel problems? This is one of my great areas of interest. It is both interesting, I am interested, I hope to interest you, and I hope we're going to earn some interest on this, okay? Is there a connection between lung problems and stomach or bowel problems? So, I am very interested in the connection between the respiratory system and the gastrointestinal system. So let's speak about it for a few moments. First, let's speak of it strictly from an anatomical and mechanical perspective, okay? Anatomically, the lungs sit on top of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is in between the lungs and the gastrointestinal contents, or should I say the abdominal contents, and that includes the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Put them all together and we call them the guts. So we got the lungs, the diaphragm, and the guts, right? All right, so here are the connections. And don't be confused, and don't underestimate what I'm about to say, because I'm saying it in a funny voice, okay? This is all going to be serious stuff right now. So here we go. From a mechanical perspective, the way that we inspire, the way that we take a breath in, is by contraction of the diaphragm. The diaphragm contracts downward, and that creates a negative pressure, and that negative pressure causes our lungs to inflate, okay? Now, just below the diaphragm are the guts, aka the abdominal contents, aka the stomach, the intestines, the colon, etc. The colon's the large intestine, for those of you that don't know. Okay? So from a mechanical perspective, anything that is going to increase the pressure in the abdominal cavity is going to increase the resistance against which the diaphragm must contract, okay? So again, we have a thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity contains the lungs, the heart, and other organs, okay? The mediastinum is what contains the heart, and all the great vessels go through there, okay? And the abdominal cavity. And the abdominal cavity contains the stomach, the intestines, etc., 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 okay? And the thing is that if you think of this like a suitcase, right? So the suitcase is, one side is the thoracic cavity, one side is the abdominal cavity, and if you overstuff one, that's going to impede on the other, right? Am I right? I'm right. All right, so the idea being, let's talk about ways that the abdominal contents can impede upon the thoracic cavity, how the abdominal cavity can affect the thoracic cavity. So let's start with this. How many of you are more short of breath after eating a meal, particularly a large meal, okay? That's because we've overstuffed, or we've stuffed, or we've put more contents into this side of the suitcase, which is now going to increase the pressure on this side of the suitcase. So the more full your abdominal contents are, so the more full the more full your abdominal contents are, the more full your GI system is with food. And keep in mind that your body doesn't care if it's solid, liquid, or gas, meaning if it's food stuff, if it's liquid or drinks, or if it's air, meaning that you're bloated or you have gas, right? So any increase in abdominal pressure or intra-abdominal pressure is going to increase the resistance against which the diaphragm must contract and increase the resistance in the thoracic cavity. And the issue with that is if the pressure is great enough, it can actually push everything up, constrict the lungs, right? And then decrease the amount of air that you can take in with each breath. Now, if it decreases the amount of air that you could take in with each breath, right? Imagine that you have to breathe a lot faster, right? So this is it before. This is it now. With me? All right. So there's that. Okay, that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that intra-abdominal pressure plays a huge role in blood pressure as well. So if the pressure inside the abdomen is great, okay, think constipation, okay, then that can substantially increase your blood pressure. So sometimes somebody will come in, their pressure will be high. Of course, we talk about salt, and we talk about the fact that have you been eating a lot of salt lately, okay? But another thing to consider is, do you have bad gas? When was the last time you had a bowel movement, okay? So if you haven't had a bowel movement for several days, then guess what? That intra-abdominal pressure is going to be much greater. Blood pressure can be higher. The resistance against which the diaphragm must contract is much greater. That could even push everything up, as I showed you before. That is going to increase your shortness of breath. That can also potentially decrease the amount of air you can take in with each breath and make you breathe that much faster. The other thing to consider is that if you had a big carbohydrate meal, that's also going to increase the amount of carbon dioxide production and make you breathe faster. So now imagine you just had a big meal with like, pasta and bread and fried calamari, etc., etc., etc. So now we have this mechanical obstruction sitting in the abdominal cavity, okay? The diaphragm has trouble pushing downward. The lungs have difficulty inflating, right? Plus you're also getting this chemical signal that we're full of carbon dioxide and therefore you better breathe. All of this leads to a very, very uncomfortable situation, both gastrointestinally as well as respiratory-wise, okay? This is why patients come to me sometimes and say things like, I don't understand what happened. I went to the restaurant with my wife and we walked there and there was no problem. Yet after dinner, we had to take a cab even though it was only about a block. How do you explain that? And I explain it just the way I just explained it. Okay? Increased intra-abdominal pressure leads to increased intrathoracic pressure, which leads to an increase in resistance against the diaphragm, which leads to increased resistance to lungs inflating. Got it? Okay. So there's that, okay? Then we look at the flip side of that. So the patient with obstructive lung disease, particularly emphysema with hyperinflation, okay? That person who's got the hyperinflated lungs, now we have those lungs pushing down on a normally dome-shaped diaphragm, right? Except now the diaphragm is flattened out, and that can then increase the pressure on the abdominal cavity. So there's that. There's the breathing perspective and the mechanical perspective and a little bit of the chemical perspective that I told you just there. Okay, other things to keep in mind are that when you have hyperinflated lungs, when you have increased intrathoracic pressure, or intra-abdominal pressure, or both, okay? All of these things are going to increase the pressure on the abdominal contents, increasing the chances of reflux, okay? Increasing the chances that abdominal contents may spill back up through the esophagus and even go into the trachea, because we know that the opening of the esophagus and the opening of the trachea or the airways are very close to each other. And then when this food stuff, and we call this aspiration, which can lead to aspiration pneumonia, when this goes into the airways, this can be very, very, not just uncomfortable, but it can really increase inflammation in the airways. So reflux is something that I believe every respiratory patient should at least have checked out once. So in other words, they should see, I think, depending upon the severity of your disease, I think it's worthwhile to see a gastroenterologist because the reflux can be very damaging, okay? And a lot of times people say, well, I don't have any symptoms of it. There's also something called silent reflux. So that silent reflux, even though you may not feel it from a gastrointestinal perspective, it can actually be causing inflammation in the airways. Let's think what else. Okay? Just other considerations, and this is not a direct link between stomach and lungs per se, but well, let me back up for 1 second, okay? The other question I get asked a lot related to stomach and lungs is it okay to swallow my secretions? So what if I can't cough it up, but I swallow it? No problem, okay? The stomach acids are very, very powerful, and they will break down any mucus that you swallow. So while it's a little bit gross, and while of course it would be better for you to spit it out and get it out of your body, there's really no harm in swallowing the secretions, okay? Back to what I was gonna say before, just different things related to stomach upset. So I mentioned constipation before, but also I wanna talk about diarrhea, okay? Particularly a lot of the medications for IPF like pirfenidone, Esbriet, and Ofev. So pirfenidone and nintedanib. Am I saying that right? Let me look this up, hold on 1 second. Esbriet is pirfenidone, and let's see what Ofev is called. Nintedanib. Okay, so I'm going to say Esbriet and Ofev. Those have severe GI side effects. So, any medication that comes with Imodium AD as its partner, is going to have some side effects stomach-wise. And the thing about this, when you have diarrhea, it's not just that it makes you feel crappy, pun intended, okay? But it also plays a huge role in terms of fluid and electrolyte imbalance, okay? So fluid balance obviously is going to affect many things. It can significantly affect blood pressure, okay? And electrolyte imbalance can affect many, many things, particularly it can really affect the electrical activity of the heart and anything else that works on electrical activity. So these are the things I look out for when a patient comes in and their blood pressure is higher than usual. Okay, I'll always ask them, have they been eating more salt? Are they potentially constipated? When was the last time they had a bowel movement? I'll also look at their feet, listen to their lungs, looking for any signs of congestive heart failure. When somebody's pressure is low, I usually ask them about hydration. Okay, are they getting enough fluid? Have they had diarrhea over the last day or so? Because then in those cases, we need to replenish fluids, and we also need to replace electrolytes. And the thing that we use for that is we use Pedialyte, because it's got less sugar and it's just a little bit more mild than things like Gatorade, which have a lot of sugar in them. Other things to consider. I actually had a situation one time where somebody came in and the pressure was like 170, and we discussed the idea of had they had a bowel movement recently, and he said he hadn't gone in 3 days, and then he went to the bathroom and he came back and his blood pressure was in the 130s. That's how potentially significant being full of it can be. Okay, so you think like you're just full of it, you're full of crap. Someone says, hey, you're full of crap, they think it's funny, but it can have real life medical implications as well. And let me think, other things. Hiatal hernia is something to consider. GERD, reflux, we talked about that. I think that pretty much covers it for relationship between gastrointestinal system and the lungs, okay? If you think of anything else, please post. Today's day 15, people. Quinceañera. Have a great day. Have a great day. This is the beginning of week 3. Keep it coming. Remember what I said. Day 15. Have a great one, everybody.